God, this morning we come listening once more for your still speaking word to speak afresh into our lives. And so we ask this morning that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts would be pleasing to you. And where we depart from your Spirit, O God, may that quickly fall away. Amen.
Amen.
Have you ever been absolutely sure you were right? That you knew what was fair and just and true, that you had a corner on the truth? Absolutely. That doesn't describe any of us, right? Unfortunately, no one, not conservatives or liberals, not evangelicals or progressives, not atheists or theists, no one has escaped the curse of self-rightness. Not self-righteousness, they're similar, but not quite the same. Self-rightness, believing that you are righter, more right than everyone else. My 3 younger siblings used to tell me with some annoyance, "You always think you're right." Because I would passionately and unrelentingly argue for what I believed in. But truth be told, even if we can see from multiple points of view, even if we can put ourselves in others' shoes and understand their perspective, respect their differences, even if we can be open to new ways of looking at things, have learned not to take ourselves quite so seriously, and have accepted with humility that we may be wrong, we all have to live out of what we believe to be true. A science professor of mine in college once really surprised our class by saying to us that science is not fact. Imagine a scientist saying that. Science is not fact. There was, of course, this collective gasp that went through the class. And so he explained, it's all just our best theories, proven to the extent that they are functional in our world, in our life. I believe, for instance, that if I stepped out off a 2-story building, I wouldn't just hover and float there in the air, but I would fall very quickly to the ground and probably injure myself quite severely. We call that theory gravity. It's our best functional theory. It keeps me from doing something stupid like breaking my neck. But it's entirely possible that years from now, some scientist will discover a theory that functions even better than gravity, and we will all be proven wrong. But for now, I have to live by what I believe to be true. Likely, I'm not going to step off that 2-story building, no matter how much someone tries to tell me that gravity doesn't exist, no matter how much I understand their perspective. Now, okay, gravity is this physical thing, right? But what about theological ideas? Ideas about God? Well, actually, my science professor, who happened to be a devout Christian, he argued that theology is really not that different. It's our best theories about God. And generally speaking, we believe they are true in as much as we have found them to function in our life or in the world. Even saying something like, we don't know or we can't know that about God, is a form of theory. How about moral issues? Desmond Tutu once said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. He had this wonderful illustration. He said, if an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. On issues of morality, living in the middle without taking sides or deciding what we believe is true, it's never really the middle. We have chosen either the elephant or the mouse. Now, we might have different ideas about the best ways to rescue the mouse, and we may understand that our way isn't always the only way. But again, we're going to go with what we believe is going to function best. For many of us, we have these deeply held values and beliefs, and we hold them so strongly that many of us would die for them, perhaps even kill for them. And we, to some extent, have to follow them, or we lose ourselves, and we lose our ability to move and to function in the world. I've always been fascinated by the moral dilemma that faced German pastor and theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. His Christian faith led him to believe in the way of nonviolence. And yet, when he was presented with the opportunity to plot Adolf Hitler's assassination, he felt morally obligated to do so because of his faith. And his theory about God and the Jesus way, his theology, it expanded in light of what was functional and necessary in that particular moment in history. There are people in our world who live passionately, boldly, loudly, with what we might call a form of integrity. Their actions and their beliefs, their way of living, and their deeply held values, they all align. They live by what they believe to be true, by what they believe functions best. They live that way no matter how right or wrong-headed we might believe them to be. They are usually either the people we most admire or most despise. They are most often seen as saints or as evil incarnate, and usually as both, seen as saints by some and evil by others. Think of an abortion doctor, a Black Lives Matter activist, an ex-gay conversion therapist, and you hear what I'm saying. Well, the Apostle Paul, when he was still Saul, he was one of those passionate, loud, bold, integrated people. He believed he was right and was doing the right thing. He was following God's will. He was willing to die for, even kill for, what he believed was right. Many around him also believed he was right. They called him a hero of the faith. And there were many others, particularly those who were Jesus Way followers, who believed he was miserably, horribly wrong. If I have to imagine what Saul was like for the early community of Jesus Way followers, I would say that Saul was to them as Fred Phelps is to the LGBT community. God hates Jesus Way followers was his mantra. And not only did he picket their funerals, he planned their executions, got the crowd riled up against them so that people would actually torturously murder Jesus Way followers. Saul, the persecutor of the early church, was a deeply polarizing figure. Now, it would be nice to say that it was all just hatred and fear at the root of it all, Christophobia, if you will. That the issue for Saul was that he was just ignoring what he knew to be God's true heart. But I really think that Saul believed he was wholly standing at the heart of God's will as he did this. I think he's a lot more human and a lot more like the rest of us than maybe we like to believe. So are most people we consider awful and evil. All of us, if we are not just trying to be neutral while the elephant steps on the foot of the mouse, we're either on the path to becoming a saint or an oppressor. And sometimes we don't find out till quite a bit later which path it was we were on. Thankfully for Saul, God doesn't leave him there in his error, in his misplaced self-righteousness, unintentionally doing more harm than he ever realized. One day, something incredible happens to him, right? Saul's on the road, and he encounters the risen Christ. And it's an experience so life-transforming that afterward he takes on a new name. Now, he tries to put that experience into words, but I imagine that there weren't words that could ever really do justice to that profound moment he had on that road. Encountering Jesus spins him around in an about face to head off in a completely different direction than he had been going. Now, there are some of us familiar with Paul who really wish that experiencing meeting Jesus on the road and that he had been so wrong, that Paul maybe could have just been a little more humbled by that experience. He went from one passionate certainty to another. But perhaps God knew the immense amount of passion, believing that what he was doing was right and good and true and of God, for Paul to travel from place to place, talking about Jesus as he did, be imprisoned and tortured and persecuted for his faith. The same passion and the same faith and integration that led Paul to kill Jesus' way followers may have also been what made him the perfect person to spread the gospel to all the corners of the earth. Here is liturgist Roddy Hamilton's reflection on Paul. I am Saul. I'm passionate about my faith. I will work tirelessly for what I believe in, and I recognize that may hurt others in order to keep the faith. I've made a choice to put myself on the line for my faith, and if those who are out to destroy the faith get in the way, then I will move them out of the way. I am Paul. I am passionate about my faith. There we go. I will work tirelessly for my beliefs too. And I also recognize that doing so can hurt others. But living the faith is never going to be easy. I've made a choice to put myself on the line for my faith, and I will continue to do so, even in the face of those who want to move me out of the way. I am Saul. Faith is everything to me. It must be kept true at all costs. It is too vital to my culture, my traditions, and how I understand life. I will seek out those who destroy the faith. I will keep our borders pure and our traditions clean from contamination. I am Paul. Faith is everything to me. It must stand true at all costs. It is too vital for the good news, for traditions and culture to stand in the way of this new understanding of life. I will seek out those who limit the faith. I will cross every border and welcome in Jew and Gentile, slave and free. I am Saul. I will work for the authorities. I will hold tight to the church. I will keep the faith pure. I will be the death of Christianity. I am Paul. I will work for Jesus Christ. I will break open the church. I will keep the faith growing, and I will be its life. I am Saul. I am Paul. Now, I don't know about you, but I have some pretty strongly held beliefs that have developed in me over the years, and some that seem to have been in me since the very start. I have to have passion to get up here like this week after week and bring you some word from God.
As an introvert.
As an introvert especially, thank you. And yet, with some humility, I recognize that likely some of what I believe and even preach to you is wrong, perhaps even harmful to others. The recent shooter at the synagogue in California was a Bible-believing, church-going Christian. And I can only wonder at the kind of theology he held, which quite literally became lethal in his hands. Sometimes I pray, and I come into God's presence, wondering if there is anything like that so harmful in me, in this corner of truth that I claim. Paul's story, it gives me hope that if Jesus can barge into his life and turn him around where he had gone astray, even in lethal and deeply harmful ways, then Jesus can and will barge into my life and turn me around and show me where I'm wrong or where I'm harming others. The hard thing, as I was telling the kids, is that sometimes it's really hard to recognize when Jesus shows up in our life. We don't recognize Jesus often when and where he shows up. And we don't always understand the way he is trying to turn us in a different direction. I wonder how Paul knew that it was Jesus who met him that day. I mean, Jesus identifies himself, but what leads Paul to believe that? My hunch is that we encounter Jesus trying to turn us in an about face a lot more often than we ever realize. A friend of mine shared with me this quote, which I think may have flashed on the screen earlier. I screamed at God. I don't think it's there, right, Jean? Okay. I screamed at God for the starving child until I realized the starving child was God screaming at me. My prayer for you this week, friends, is that you may see and you may recognize the risen Christ where he shows up and spins you around. May you be humble and respectful of others, but also live passionately, loudly, and boldly, because the gospel, the good news, needs those kind of people. May you be a person of integrity, someone whose actions and beliefs, whose values and way of living align. May you have a healthy, but not an overwhelming fear of being wrong. For I truly believe Jesus will break in somehow, some way, to show us in those moments. And mostly, may you never underestimate yourself or think that because of your past mistakes, God isn't going to use you. Any of us can be part of building God's beloved community. even, and perhaps most especially, those who have at points gotten it completely wrong. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Amen.
Will you stand and join us for our next song?